Hi, it's Ursula from ursula-smith.com, and I am back today with Micaceous Iron Oxide Paint by Golden. I love this paint. It's typically comes out of the jar, this cool charcoal gray color, like graphite charcoal, whatever you want to call that color, but it's got shimmer in it. And I've done other stuff with this before. One of the things I love it for is embossing, using embossing folders with it, and then coming over it with color, either Distress Oxide or some of the metallic ink pads. And then I had done another video where I was trying to do the embossing folder bit, but I wanted more of a brown base than a black. And so I had taken some of the paint out of the jar, mixed in a couple of squirts of Distress Oxide spray, painted it on, and then embossed. And I definitely got varying shades of gray, so that worked great as compared to the gray. So the other thing that I had done was spray over the top after the paint was dry. And although it's brown, I had a little less of the shimmer. So today I wanted to try to work with the Distress Oxide spray and the Distress Oxides. I'm going to do one sample where I just paint and then spray right away rather than letting the paint dry like I did in the last example. And then just seeing, is there more of the shimmer? And then the other thing that I wanted to do, which that's what I'm going to show on camera, is I had taken the leftover paint, painted on cardstock, and then taken a stencil and kind of removed the color or some of the paint, and then it left like this cool two-tone textural look. So I wanted to see whether doing it all in one step rather than mixing the paint together, whether I could still get sort of that look. So I'm just going to take some paint, and actually I don't know why I'm using this spatula. I normally like my silicone one, but yeah, I'm going to switch to my silicone one if I can find it. Oh, here it is. So I'm just going to take some paint, and with this removal technique, if you're just going to emboss, you can put as much paint on as you like, but with the removing, it's better if you do a thinner coat, just because there's less paint to remove. And it's a thick, gritty paint, so it's just a little, especially if you use stencils like I do that have a lot of detail to them. And then I'm just going to spray, so I'm just going to I'll use walnut stain this time. So I'm just going to spray while the paint is wet with the spray. And then I'm going to stick some gloves on so I don't get my hands all dirty. I should have done this before. And then I'm going to grab a stencil. And the ones that I have kicking around are just ones that I've made from Yupo paper. Again, they're a little detailed. Actually, this one's not so bad. So this is a Yupo paper stencil that I cut 3 times. And so it's a little bit thicker than just one layer. I think that will be better. I think I'm going to use a wipe. So I'm just going to grab a wipe. You could use a paper towel if you want. These are a little bit thicker. And then you're just going to start to remove the paint. Now in the last one, the paint had actually started to dry. I've got this kind of off kilter a little bit. The paint had started to dry, so I actually did spray with water. This paint is still pretty wet, so it's not looking like I'm going to have to. And the wipe is wet, so seems like it's removing pretty well. And the brown is actually kind of going through the paint. So it does look like I'm getting that brown hue, which is the same thing that I got with mixing it in together. Sometimes, especially if I have gloves on, I just use my fingers to get into those finer details. This may be a little muddy. These little pieces are kind of moving on me. They're not attached, so those are always a little more finicky. And then I'm just using regular office supply cardstock. So you do have to be a little bit careful with that, that you don't pill it, especially with a wet wipe. So I'm going to lift up. And this is the other thing. So a lot of times the paint, especially if it's a little thicker, it will have a texture to it. Depending on how detailed your stencil is, you could go in with your finger and kind of smooth it out. I've also tried just leaving it the way it is and going in later with a sanding block. So I'll leave some of the texture there. And so you can see the image through it. Now this this technique I do think works better with more of like kind of like an all over background. I have another Yupo stencil sitting over there. I just glued it, so I'm not sure whether it's ready to go. But you know what? I do want to try something else. So the other thing I wanted to try was, rather than using just brown, what would happen if I use a different color and do this technique. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go off and paint another piece of cardstock with the paint, so you don't have to watch me paint again. And then we'll try the similar technique with it's like more of an open stencil. And then I can try it with a different color. The other thing I did want to point out too, this texture, while I may not like it as much on the piece of cardstock, I love it. I actually love it when it's like this. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just squirt some water and then take an extra piece of cardstock. See if I can line this up. Okay, and I try to pick up that texture or that leftover paint with the texture. Not sure I got enough water on it. Actually, I probably got too much water on it. But it kind of leaves a cool effect, and it is a lot of paint, but it's also the Distress Oxide. So if I wanted to come back over with regular spray stain, I could still do that technique, and the paint and Distress Oxide will theoretically resist as long as there's enough of it. So I'm going to set that aside to dry. I'm going to clean up my stencil, clean up my place, paint another piece of cardstock, and I will be back. Okay, I'm back. So I painted a thin layer of the Distress Micaceous Iron Oxide, and I'm going to take a blue color. So this is Uncharted Mariner, a little bit more of a darker blue. I'm just going to spray over the top like I did with the brown. It'll be interesting to see what this does. So this is more what I'm talking about. In the first one where I was removing the mixed-in paint, or the mixed-in Distress Oxide and paint, I used like a spider web stencil from Tim Holtz, and I love the way that came out. That had more open work and tiny, thin, parts to the stencil. And I feel like this design kind of is similar. So I'll just do a paper towel. And so this has kind of been sitting here for a couple of seconds, so I am going to just spritz a little bit and then start to remove. So interesting. It looks like there's less of the blue transferring. A little bit maybe. Oops. And I just moved the stencil. So some of the blue is going through. There's some details in there that yeah, these little, see, this is what I'm talking about, these little, these little things. It's hard to get that paint out. It's a very, like I said, even with a thin layer, it's a pretty thick paint. So again, a little more difficult for the removal. I wonder if a brush would work better. I do have a scrubby brush somewhere. Ooh, scrubby brush sitting right here. Ooh. And the cardstock is wet now, so it is pilling a little bit. And this is a very stiff brush. Try and go a little bit softer with it, but it does seem like it's helping remove some of that paint. And I can see some blue, so that's interesting. And I did still get that texture. I mean, again, it's kind of a cool look. So this one I'm going to leave. I'm not going to try to remove the text. Actually, I kind of like that. I'm going to leave it just so that we can evaluate it once it's all dried down, because you can kind of see the blue in that texture. So that does kind of look neat. And then maybe what I'll do is, if there's any texture left on the first one, or we can take like a little corner on this one, I can use a sanding block and show you what that looks like when it's dry. And then the same thing with this. There's not a whole lot on there, but just a couple of squirts. And then I'll try and pick up some of the leftover. Sometimes the leftover is better, than the original project. Yep, I didn't pick up very much at all, so I don't know. Sometimes I even just use the stencil as, do the reverse kind of print, because I like that look. So I got more of the ink and less of the paint, but still might be usable. All right, so I'm going to go clean up, let everything dry, and when it is, I will be back. Okay, I'm back, and so I just wanted to show you... So this was just a plain piece of cardstock coated in Micaceous iron oxide, and then I sprayed over it in Walnut Stain. And I do feel like this was the one where I sprayed it dry. This was the one where I sprayed it wet. Now again, I could have oversprayed here, but I do feel like there's a little more of the shimmer that comes through and less of the oxide that's sitting on top. So again, if you're embossing and they're going to add colors on top of it, not that big a deal. But for the ease, just painting and spraying right away is the easiest. And again, if you're going to emboss, works great. I still kind of like the look of it mixed in. It's still that brown color, but looks a lot more like Micaceous iron oxide. You know, you can see the sparkles and things. So, and then that's the, again, I think that's the normal graphite color. So, so anyway, that's the way it came out, just painted and sprayed. Then get back to, this was the example where I tried to do the pull off the paint through a stencil, and it's a little rough looking. I left it this way because I talked about trying to use a sanding sponge on top of it to get rid of some of that texture. And so, I don't know if you can tell the difference. Let's finish this corner up there. And it will leave some dust, so. So that kind of smoothed it out a little bit. I mean, I still have some spots there. So you can do as much or as little as you like to get rid of some of those high spots or that texture. And some of that image does start to come back in. And again, if you don't like it this rough, you could bring the stencil back over and go through and color it. I'm going to put you on pause. I did have another sample. I wrecked it because I moved the stencil and I was spraying through it. But I'll give you an example of what it might look like if you bring in a lighter color. So I'm just going to pause and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. So I just wanted to show you. Here's another example, kind of the same, almost probably same colors, just a little bit lighter coating of paint. So you can see the image. It's still like more of that grungy look to it. So if you like that look, play around with it. And you know, it sort of does depend on the stencil and the coating of paint, but it can still work. And so then what I wanted to show you, this was my mess up. So I had a very similar situation, and probably even worse. And so what I decided to do was try to spray through the stencil again. And I used one of the yellow oxides. I'm just trying to remember which one. Oops. It was either, I think it was Scattered Straw. And so I sprayed through it. And like I said, I moved the stencil, oversprayed, then tried to correct it again. So, you know, whatever, I wrecked it. But what I wanted to point out here was that color combination. So this was the same mixture. Micaceous iron oxide with the Distress Oxide walnut stain mixed together, removed through the stencil, and then the Scattered Straw, which oxidized very light. And so that really, that contrast just works. So that color combination, if you don't mess it up, really works. And if you really want to be careful, you could just use the ink pad rather than the spray. Spray, it's quick, and it's awesome because it's quick, but you run the risk of doing what I just did. So that was that. That was the leftover. And it's really hard. So yeah, I don't know. There you go. So there's just hints of that Micaceous iron oxide where you can see the little flecks of shimmer. So I just think that's really cool. Coming over the top with the plain Distress spray stain, I feel like in this case there's not a ton of it, so I probably run the risk of, you know, basically wiping it out. And so I wanted to show you this. So this one, it hasn't fully dried, maybe not. So this was what another one. So this was just a leftover, and I sprayed over the top with a couple of colors of regular Distress spray stain, but you can see any of the places where the Micaceous iron oxide is, you can still see that little bit of shimmer. So, you know, for a background, I just feel like it's kind of a cool look. It's grungy. It's got a little bit of sparkle to it. I mean, I'm sure people will be like, how did you get that little bit of glimmer? And literally, it's just a mop-up. It's a cleanup piece. So in any event, you know, unless you're totally married to the mop-up piece, you might want to try throwing some of the spray stains over the top. Or again, you could use regular Distress ink pads, or probably any kind of just straight dye, not a pigment, but a dye-based ink pad on top. And that shimmer looks to stick around. And then this was just another example where I did the same thing, and I just want to point out there's a lot of texture left from lifting the stencil off the paint. It was a heavy, heavy coating of paint. I haven't decided whether I'm going to go in and sand. I mean, I like what's going on here, some of that Distress oxidized, and then it just kind of looks like an eerie mirror or frame. And so, you know, if I were going to do something in at Halloween time, I might want that grungy look to it. So for now, I'm not going to get rid of that texture. I can always go back in and sand it later if I wanted. And then this was the one where I sprayed over the top with blue rather than brown. And I love even with all the texture going on, I love the way this came out. So I will not end up sanding this. I'll just leave it. It's a really cool, again, kind of funky background where, you know, maybe if you're a stamper and you know, play around yourself, you might know how, you know, somebody did this, but it's just a different look. And so I really, really like this technique, even though it probably has its higher share of failure. Every so often you get something that looks really, really cool. So I will continue to play with it. And yeah, I really like it. So, and then the last thing was, again, along that same vein of coming over the top of the Micaceous iron oxide with Distress oxide spray in colors. This was just painted and then sprayed. So the colors definitely show up. And this was kind of, I don't know, it just reacted. This was over wet paint again. And so this side oxidized a little bit down here, so a little bit of a reaction, more so on the green side. And then this was Festive Berries, and this was peeled paint. So I like those two colors on top of the Micaceous iron oxide. And you can see the shimmer. Just a cool look. Anyway, thanks for joining me for this experiment, and we'll see you next time.